Joseph Heller is the esteemed author of several wonderful novels, including Catch-22, Something Happened, Good as Gold. The list goes on. Currently, he has a new book out, just published by Alfred A. Knopf, called Now and Then, From Coney Island to Here, which is an autobiography, and we want to welcome him to the program. Hello. Wonderful book.
I'm glad. I agree with you.
It's great to go and read it, and you can match characters that were in your life to characters that turn up in your fiction.
Especially if you read my fiction again and read it closely. There was a subtle attempt to explain parts of all of my novels. Not just Catch-22, which is not there directly, but in terms of my background, to present to the discerning reader and the interested reader parts of my experience that did work their way into my novels.
Part of the feeling I got from this book is that you really can never go home again. It starts out in Brooklyn in the Coney Island section. And
it does. You can't go home again. As I mentioned, I don't live there. Nobody I know who grew up with lives there who would want to. But I do think as one ages, the home, one becomes more attached, more patriotic toward the beginnings. And the feelings I've had toward Coney Island and Brooklyn while writing the book and since writing the book are probably stronger than I've ever had.
So I guess you need to have the proper amount of time to digest everything, put it into perspective, and then really...
You can't go home again because the home is not there anymore. And when you go back, it's not the same place because the person has advanced in age and he's no longer the child or the adolescent. The environment has changed. The memory persists. And the memory of the experience persists, and it's a very formative experience, not just Coney Island. The first 19 years of a person's life contributes more to his life, I think, than anything that follows it. In my case, I lived there for the first 19 years of my life and left only to go into the Army for World War II.
Well, you also had a couple of jobs. I think you worked as a file clerk and...
Yeah. Oh, that's between high school and the Army. My first job was as a Western Union messenger delivery boy. Then immediately after high school, I worked as a file clerk in an insurance company with an office underneath the main floor for dead records. And that appears in Something Happened, where my main character, Bob Slocum, is working for a company and does have an office for dead records, about which he speculates very much. I worked as a blacksmith's helper in the Navy Yard before going to the Army. That was a time when defense work was there, and the pay was several times better than one could expect. It was $1 an hour at a time when the minimum wage was 25 cents an hour. And then when I was approaching 19, I enlisted because I would have been drafted. And then the World War II was a very big experience for people of my generation, especially for those of us who weren't killed or wounded or taken prisoners. Sort of divided the century and divided my life. When I came out, I went to college and married right after the war. All my friends got married right after the war at the age of 21 or 22, went to college, and then from there, that's the life that I've lived. That led to my becoming a writer and becoming a successful writer and to my being here today.
You write about, in Now and Then, you write about being a kid who barely knew how to drive or didn't even know how to drive, and here you were getting training into how to be a bombardier.
Well, bombardier is easy. What I marveled at then, and marveled at even more, is how these young pilots could pilot an airplane. Excuse me. And I mentioned the one I was friendly with. He was about 5'2", and about my age, which was 21. And there he was flying a B-25 bomber. And there were thousands like that.
Right. And during this time also you found some time to read. It seems that you were a voracious reader throughout this time and write some.
Well, I began writing while I was in the Army and while I was overseas. And shortly before coming home, I wrote a short story that became my first published short story. That was before college. There was a man moved into my tent, a replacement, who had a typewriter. I was finished with my missions, and while he was flying his missions, I used his typewriter and wrote a short story that was published in Story magazine in about 1945 or 6, and that was my first published work. Then enrolling in college as a benefit under the GI Bill of Rights. I took a course in short story writing at New York University, along with a dozen others in the class. I did very well. Of course, we were all advanced compared to typical college students. Then I was 22 or 23 years old, and had read much more than the average freshman. And then in that course, I wrote stories that were published. So I had a good reason to believe I should continue in my aspirations to be a fiction writer.
Which, fortunately for us, you did. In reading this, I was trying to figure out whether it was an impetus for you to write, that you knew all these great characters growing up, all these people, or whether that was just your particular way of seeing people and how you describe them. I mean,
I don't think the characters I wrote was particularly were great characters or especially colorful. I suppose they were, but I would guess you'd find them in any neighborhood where they had nicknames and where there was gambling and where there was dancing before the war and the social clubs. When I look back, I'm the greatest character. They were picturesque in the same way that Damon Runyon's short stories have characters who are picturesque. They were bookmakers, they were gamblers. There were no drug addicts then. After the war, heroin came into Coney Island, and a few people I grew up became drug addicts. They were gamblers, and there were nuts and and eccentrics. Hershey Jones was one, and this guy Quasimodo was another. They would run up walls together.
You actually wrote a paper or tried your hand at being a handicapper, too, didn't you?
No, that was as a freshman at University of Southern California. I did 1 year there. That's where I entered college. As a theme, we were assigned to write a composition dealing with how to do something. And I, was already ambitious to be a writer, wrote a comic essay on how to win money at the races. I got a good mark on it. I sent it off to Esquire. Esquire bought it, paid me $200 or $250, which I lost at the races. But that was my second published work. The first was that short story. The second was that. And then the next year, I was having short stories published by Esquire and the Atlantic Monthly. I felt pretty good about it. My new wife felt good about it. But as I mentioned in Now and Then, that was a year that was phenomenal for young American authors, because that same year of 1948, which was my big year, Truman Capote and Gore Vidal and Norman Mailer each published a novel, and novels that made them famous. While I was having short stories published. It was a wonderful time to be an American author.
Do you think if times hadn't been what they were then, that your road on life would have been vastly different if you hadn't have gotten the first one published? And then
of course. Even with the published short stories, after finishing college, I sought a job and found the best one I could find. The first one was teaching as an instructor at Pennsylvania State College for 2 years. Then coming back to New York, I answered a want ad for an advertising copywriter trainee, and I got that job, and that's the kind of work I did for the 7 or 8 years it took to write Catch-22. And if Catch-22 had not been published, I would have given up writing fiction anyway, because I'm a slow writer. That was 7 years of work. And if it had not been as successful, I possibly would not have become a writer. I probably would have thought of screenwriting. So my life would have been different. I think without World War II and the GI Bill of Rights, I might never have applied myself seriously to writing fiction. I might not have had the background that's educational background that's necessary to be a novelist today.
You did do a little work on screenplays, didn't you? I think you mentioned Sex and the Single Girl.
I had a chance once in a while to do work on a screenplay. It was rewriting. Yeah. And the one I remember is Sex and the Single Girl, which was 5 wonderful weeks in California meeting actors and directors, and 5 more weeks back home to finish it. And then back to novel writing. It's I'm very good. I still am very good at rewriting a screenplay. I think I'd be awful at writing a whole screenplay. It would take me 7 years to do it. And it's a kind of vacation. I'm glad now looking back, I'm glad I never became a screenwriter. I have friends who are screenwriters. They're not particularly happy. some of them are wealthy or comparatively wealthy compared to the average novelist, but they're not particularly happy with their work.
It's more an artistic dead end, I think.
Well, it's a dead end. My closest friend writes screenplays all the time, and he gets paid well, but they're almost never produced. And if they are produced, then another writer comes into, and then a writer comes in after that one. So there's not any strong identification with the work.
Right. Yeah. It's sort of like being... I guess, well...
Yeah, Mario Puzo was a close friend of mine before I published Catch-22, before he did The Godfather, and he did work on screenplays. I think he's got 2 Academy Awards. His view was it's not a medium for the screenwriter. The screenwriter does his work, it's accepted, and then they don't want him around because they have another screenwriter.
Right. There can be so many rewrites after that. Well, he turns up now and then a couple of times. And
he comes up as a friend from far back. And he still is. In fact, we had lunch last week. He lives out in Long Island, and I live out, and we meet in between in Southampton, have lunch every few weeks.
He went back with you to Coney Island at one point, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, Mario is not from Brooklyn. He was from Hell's Kitchen, New York. There was one time when it was a spring or a summer day. He had a couple of young kids. I did too. We had nothing to do, and I had a car then. So we got in. We went to Coney Island. I went to Steeplechase. And I watched my kids running around the way I used to run around.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things I really love about Now and Then are the little bits of sort of philosophy that come up in them. And when you mentioned Norman Mailer, I thought about a passage where you're talking about people having choices. And if people have a lot of choices, you think... Yeah. You look at Norman Mailer's life and how much fun it is, but still everybody is more or less...
Well, what I said is that there are aspects of Norman Mailer's life I covet, but I'm glad I haven't lived his life, and I'm not him. And being imaginative almost from childhood, I always had certain fantasies. One is to live on the Riviera, or live in Tuscany, or sleep with Elizabeth Taylor or Marilyn Monroe. And now in my maturity, I'm glad none of those things ever happened. I didn't really want to have a house. I didn't really want to have anything to do with either of those women.
Actually, you just wanted to have the fantasy of it, I guess.
Oh, yeah. It's a dream of glory, I suppose. And the attraction is not so much in living abroad or in being linked with some famous beauty itself. The attraction is being known to have succeeded in that area.
Well, and to some extent, as a writer, I guess you're on the outside of things, recording them, too. So that might have
Not really, no. No, I don't think it applies. I think Norman Mailer's been on the inside of all his experiences. Right. It's a different nature and different personality. I'm not Norman Mailer. I'm not confrontational. I don't have his courage. I don't like fights he has. And it would be... It's a daydream to try to put myself into his position or the position of anybody else. As it is, I've worked out pretty well. I've worked things out pretty well with myself. And I'm not displeased.
Well, you seem to have done very well for yourself. Yeah. And
yes, I have.
Happy.
I've done it my own way. I don't want to say it that way either, because it brings me close to Sinatra, who's never a favorite of mine. So
and you don't want to do it his way. So.
No, I don't want to do it his way either. And I don't like that song.
But one of the chapters is about psychiatry, and in there I caught a little catch-22, and that is and in order to be a successful patient for psychoanalysis, I think it is, you have to have the time and intelligence, and in fact, not need.
That's pretty much the truth, and I think that the few psychoanalysts I've met, including the one I had, would pretty much agree that in order for a patient to be a good prospect for psychoanalysis, he has to have a pretty strong character, not a weak character. He would be neurotic or have neuroses of many kinds that would interfere with his enjoyment, but he will have to have been able to master them. They don't treat emotionally disturbed people with psychoanalysis. I don't think they do anymore. And one as I say in my case, I benefited from it. I would have benefited more from it, but I did not really need it. And I think we understood that with each other from the beginning.
It was more of to get self-assured or something?
It was to pull myself together at a time when things were in turmoil in my life. I was getting a divorce. I'd quarreled with a publisher. I had found a new place. I had to find a new place to live. It was all very upsetting to me. And when I met with this Dr. Michaels, very intelligent man, and an admirer of Catch-22.
Always helps.
He said the therapy would not help me with these day-to-day problems, but he thought in the long run I might benefit from it. And that's the basis on which we went in.
I wonder if that helps the analyst or therapist or whatever you see, if you're a writer, that they have this body of work that they can read and do some analysis with.
I don't think they need it. They get it from talking. I told them an anecdote once that I heard about Zero Mostel, with whom I was friendly. Zero came back one day and was boasting his friend, so he went into a psychoanalyst and made up dreams for him. And then toward the end, either one of his friends said, or he realized, who am I fooling by doing this? I'm paying him my $75 an hour. And then when I mentioned that to my analyst, it makes no difference whether you have the dream or not. What he is inventing would be or could be as an indicative of the unconscious of what might have happened. I mean, after all, a dream is a fantasy anyway. A dream is an invention. It's just not controllable.
Do you think that writing fiction and then getting to the point now where you have an autobiography, that the fiction sort of prepared you for doing this in some way?
I don't know if it prepares me or not. I know that I had no better idea for a novel after my last one, which was produced as a sequel to Catch-22. I've been asked several times to write a biography, particularly about people in New York who are interested in Coney Island. And I thought at that time, after closing time and after Catch-22 and the other novels, that maybe I should write an account of my life, of those parts which I felt were most significant to me in shaping me and in organizing my mind for the works of fiction I wrote. And I began this now and then. And it was a very enjoyable experience, as difficult as writing a novel. I was surprised by the difference in paragraph structures required, difference in vocabulary, difference from the type of language I use in my fictions. It prepared me to be a writer and to write a biography in several ways. I knew I'd have it published, for example, so I wasn't dealing with speculation, and I knew it would be published no matter what I put in or didn't. And had I not been a writer, I would not have had anything to write about. So there would never have been this memoir or autobiography.
Mm-hmm. Did it take as long, though? Did it take 7 years?
No. My first novel took 7. The second, Something Happened, took 13, 12 or 13. After Something Happened, I was then financially secure, and I could then work only at novels. And from that time on, they took between about 4 years each or 5. This took less now and then because one, it's a shorter book mainly, and I knew what the material would be, or most of the material would be. This, I think, now and then took about 2 years or a little more than 2. I can't write rapidly. I no longer try. I used to try with Catch-22 and Something Happened, and then I realized I'm unable to. I'm powerless to. So I write at the only pace I can.
So you have to be yourself, or do it your way, or whatever.
Pretty much you do, yeah. It's different from other authors I know. I never write a first draft and then rewrite a first draft, whereas I'll read about authors who write a whole book and then rewrite it. And even from Catch-22, I go along paragraph by paragraph and chapter by chapter.
It was very interesting, the presence of your father in the book.
Yeah, or the absence of
the absence, yeah. Sort of almost ghostly presence of your father in the book, that from the beginning and then again towards the end.
Yeah.
How he comes
well, there too you get. I'm in touch with one of the mysteries of the human mind, the brain. He died when I was 5, and I never let myself miss him consciously. He was never part of my life by thinking of anything. Until when I was 36 or so and taking out a life insurance policy, and I was asked what he died from, I realized I had not the slightest idea. I'd never asked. I also knew enough of Freudian psychology then to understand that if I didn't know, it was because I never wanted to find out. Mm-hmm. So there was a double shock there, the realization I've been hiding very much from myself. And then in writing this book, I could no longer evade the fact that his presence by his absence. It had a very profound effect upon shaping me, my emotions, my personality, and my outlooks. Evidenced by the fact in every one of my works, the climax comes with the death of a character, and it's never the death of the main character. And that's not a philosophy. That's pure coincidence. I realize that would surprise as well. So death and my father's death undoubtedly had a tremendous impact on me. And I was either lucky enough or unlucky enough to conceal it from myself and not let it affect me consciously.
So it was a sort of willful ignorance on the conscious level that maybe drove you with your writing.
Yes, and it's the kind of thing that people in touch with the vocabulary would say was repression, an act of repression, which was involuntary, in a sense unconscious on my part, and it took place without my willing it that way and not willing it that way. There's a line in the last chapter of one of my other book, God Knows, about King David. Not the last chapter, but it ends the chapter and says the human brain has a mind of its own. And I think I'm well convinced that's true.
And what was that phrase your mother used about your brain?
Oh, she said I have a twisted brain. But I was always clowning around and wisecracking and joking. That too, incidentally, I'm ready to, there's an aspect of a defensive personality. My kidding around and wanting to make people laugh, and there's also something perverse in that. I now know that practical joking and wisecracks usually have a sadistic undertone to them, a bitter undertone, which I didn't know until just now.
Yeah, there's something of a saying that every joke is at someone's expense, or something to that effect. Which is pretty true. Well, when you talk about analysis or psychiatry, you also mentioned that I think it was during one of the tests proceedings you took, that the child and not father-child, but the adult-child relationship came out a lot.
No, that's a theatic apperception test, TAT. When I was still working on Catch-22 and getting better and better jobs in advertising, I had to take, in order to get a job as a minor executive at McCall's magazine, I had to go through a battery of psychological tests. The Rorschach test was one, and I was amused by all of these, except for what's called the TAT, thematic apperception test, where a picture is shown that would be absolutely neutral to a person, and you were asked to describe it or tell us. And that was a very saddening experience with some of these cards. And the meaning I invested into these drawings, I have to say invested because I'm projecting these. There's nothing in the drawing itself to indicate. Almost they always have to do with separation or parents and child relationships of a saddening nature.
Right. The Coney Island in Now and Then, and you yourself have changed so much from the beginning to the end of the book. And it's the end, you see the difference in the people with the drug addictions, the heroin addicts.
Well, that would be, would not be the end. That would be what I experienced while I was still living there, after the war, and when I would go back to visit. It's between that time, which would be 1945, 1950, and now there's been huge changes, and I don't know which changes you're referring to.
Well, I was just referring to within the structure of the book, you start with your youth there, and then it sort of ends talking about character Danny the Bull, is that
he's a heroin addict who did murder his mother. But the huge changes took place after the war. Prior to the war, we were a very insular neighborhood. Insular close was almost like a shtetl in Europe, where everybody was Jewish, all the parents were immigrants, they all earned pretty much the same amount of money, and we grew up with that, in that environment. There was almost never any law breaking and never any crime. Following the war, things changed very much so. I don't know how it happened, because by then I was married and living in Manhattan and going to college, but there were the heroin addicts, and with the heroin addicts there were minor crimes of theft. The heroin addict would steal from his mother or sister to have money for it. And one of the more extreme cases was Danny the Bull, who tried desperately to get cured. He went to Lexington, Kentucky, went out to California, and each time he came back, he fell back into the habit, and eventually murdered his mother. And I use that as an extreme example of the change. There were a few other people who dropped dead in the streets from heroin poisoning. So the society was changing too. It was changing, for most of it was changing for the better. We had opportunities to go to college. Employment was easy then. We found jobs that could be exciting. And then for other people, it was turning very bad. And I think that characterizes American society today. We've never had so large a prosperous population as we have. We also have never had, I think, so large an underprivileged population living on a poverty level.
But I also got the feeling from that part about Danny that you and he didn't have that different a start, in a sense. I mean, his father, I guess, left when he was young. You both had single mothers, but your experiences and your life was so
vastly different. And
personality and that.
Yeah, one can't account for it, except that my impression is that those of us who never thought of becoming a heroin addict or a cocaine addict seem to have strong personalities, positive personalities. I could think of George Mandel or Marvin Winkler or Davy Goldsmith, and immediately you see a personal character there. Danny the Bull was kind of vague, amorphous. Some of the others were too. I don't want to mention names because a few might still be alive. But they seem to be hanging on in the periphery of social groups without having a definite place in it or a definite identification.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that getting out, I mean, actually seeing the world, even if through wartime, helped to sort of propel you also out of it?
No, I don't think so, because I think many of the people I'm referring to now are also in the service. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the difference would be. I really don't, and I don't know if there are a lot of explanations.
Personality.
There are questions for which we have no answers. It doesn't stop the various professionals from always supplying the answer. I would have my doubts about it.
Well, now that you've completed doing an autobiography, do you feel like you're ready to go back and do some fiction? Or
I feel I want to go back and do some fiction. I'm not doing it yet because I still have this interview to do. And
a talk or two.
Yeah, a talk or two. And then I'll rest, and then I want very much to go back to fiction. I don't know what book I'll write. I think after Catch-22 and then after closing time, which closes out, I think, what I think is the first stage of my career as a writer, spanning 50 years. I'm ready to begin again. It will be a novel, short stories, and don't attract me. I don't have a gift for confession anymore. But I don't know what it will be. I know that I will want it to be different from any of the novels I've written, and different from novels that other people are writing.
Well, it's good news to us all that you're going to be continuing writing your wonderful fiction. And this is actually a great read. I should mention again, Now and Then, From Coney Island to Here, which was published by Alfred A. Knopf.
Yes.
I'm going to have to go back and read all your earlier stuff again and sort of draw a little line and make the characters match up and see if I can crack the code there.
Well, that was it. The idea was to make people go back and reread my works.
Successful, once again.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Joseph Heller, for coming on the program. It's been a real honor having you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure being here.